David and me, we studied in Ghent at the university. And by the time we were studying there, we studied more or less at the same time there. I think the school was rather young. It was part of an engineering faculty, and it was trying to find its way. And I think it went on a quite experimental path like that. I think it was very interested in the Italian, would say, Tafuri-inspired discourse on architecture. And this in combination with, to some extent, quite a heavy engineering background, if I look back at it, I think was very important to us. So, so this, I think, was something we both started to share. Now, of course, the school was small, and I think in many ways it was relatively easy for us. And for that reason, I think that was perhaps the main reason, we went to Spain. I mean, I went to Spain, and a bit later David went to Spain. And I think we went to Spain, first of all, I mean, you have to understand we're talking mid-90s, because a lot was happening there, but we didn't quite know what. We didn't really know who was who and, you know, who we liked to study with. And I think quite by accident, I ended up, and David later, to study with Abalos Herreros, and Juan. And, you know, I think their importance only became clear to us while being there. And then, I mean, they were quite peculiar. Not only were they teaching both together, having an office together, also they were, in a way, I would say, quite conceptual. But again, I would say with an engineering background, strangely enough. I mean, they were known as being rather dry. I mean, they were not very exuberant in their architecture. And they were endlessly talking about things which back then started to be key to what we started to like later. I mean, they were talking about Rainer Banham, they were talking about the Smithsons, and I mean, we're talking early 90s, mid-90s, so I mean, the Smithsons had their complete revival just after that. But I had the impression they were quite early with this. So that was a thing. Yeah, of course, I mean, I think, first of all, I think in Belgium, there's never been a lot of money all of a sudden to do a lot of things. That had a lot of disadvantages in the 80s and early 90s perhaps, but they had some advantages, which is that people who then choose to work with an architect, they very much believe in the cultural value of it. So it gives you a relative freedom in doing what you would like to do, as long as you operate within a very limited set of economical parameters. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think it was, as I said, the combination of Tafuri-esque reading of architecture plus perhaps the engineering, as I mentioned, but also going to Spain, seeing Abalos and Herreros, see how, in a way, as simple as the buildings were, there was a very clear argument. They were writing next to it, and that was very, very key, very key. And I mean, and then the third thing was, I mean, they were so fascinated by LA, or perhaps they weren't, but at least that's how I remember. And so David and me, we went to LA just a year after that, and again, you know, David Hockney going to LA, Ed Ruscha being in LA. We had a lot of these kind of, I would say, critical positions, but these positions weren't so explicit. They were kind of implicit, conceptual, implicit positions. I mean, not with writing too much about it, but having, in a way, whether it's an art practice or an architecture practice, having a practice and thinking about the practice at the same time. But interdisciplinary, I think, for us means that you do what you're best at, and other people do what they're best at, and everybody does together something which is maybe more than the sum of parts. I don't think it is a desire to become a graphic designer as an architect, or a journalist as an architect, or anything else. No, I think we have a limited set of tools which we perhaps, to a certain extent, try to master. And Bas Prinsen, for example, as a photographer, is just a very good photographer. So that also means that when he takes pictures, you don't tell him what he has to take. He does what he has to do because he feels that's right. And I think that's very important. I think it's a relationship based on respect. And I think for us it's important because I think we've always been very fascinated by different art productions. So if you believe in these different subcategories of cultural production, I think you have to give it a space. And I think also again back to where we come from, we were often a little bit put off by what happened north of us, and this desire by quite many officers to do everything at the same time. I think we tried to make things simpler again. I think it has a lot to do with our education outside of the school, to a certain extent, outside of university. I think we've been confronted a lot with the drawings of Ungers, for example. We've been confronted, like you say, with Riedijk, with Rossi, with early OMA drawings. Of course, they were all there, but we've been very fascinated also by much earlier things, like say early Renaissance, like Bramant and things like that. And I mean, and you start to meet also a group of people. I mean, whether it is Pier Vittorio Aureli of Dogma or Pier Paolo Tamburelli of Balcu. I mean, I think they were, or Andrea Zanderigo. I mean, I think there was a moment where we were very, very much fascinated by the same things, and I think everybody brought in things in that debate, and in a strange way, I think we were doing sometimes things of which we didn't quite know what they were. And then, somebody looks like, hey, look at that Sterling stuff. And then, and I think it's also something you develop. And I mean, I'm very happy also that in more recent times, with the Balcu guys, with not only them, we're doing this San Rocco magazine. And I think it allowed us also, it gave a framework to I would say research, but in a very easygoing way, kind of to find back traces of what we thought interested us. So if I would now today say, yeah, it was Sterling, I think I would lie. No, I think we just did things which we thought were beautiful, and they were often based on a certain pragmatism that we could not use 3D programs, render programs. But looking at that work, it kind of did, hit back. I thought, oh yeah, sure, that's interesting. You cannot underestimate, I think, to our production, the influence of certain art practices. I mean, I mentioned already a couple like Rocher or Hockney, but also, I mean, as cliche as it may sound, Dan Graham was very important. There's much, in a way, weirder artists like, Matt Mullican, who I deeply adore. There's been a lot of these artists who were working on the fringe of installation and art, which had a very specific, slightly disconnected approach to drawing, to things, to model, to object, which became very important to us and also allowed us in a way to step back a bit and not to be too much part of the common discourse. I mean, Bas Prinsen we talked about before, but I think Bas brought in a lot, not only his own work, but also a debate about Louis Baltz, for example, who we all highly esteem. I think a very important photographer for us. I mean, of course, there is some of the Germans, the German gang of photographers, which were important. But I believe it was really looking at how you frame parts of the world, and then you realize that the way Baltz or Bas were looking at things is perhaps not so different as some of the arguments which even Ungers had in relation to the structuralists in the 70s, but with a slight, odd, different way of looking. Or Robert Smithson, who I think was very important. Now the way he was collecting things, and I mean his take on land art, where I think land art is a far too limited label to find his work. Drawing maps and collecting things, or taking photographs, and the photograph plus the map is a project. I mean, and then it brings you almost back to this kind of arguments of reality as found, which are kind of Smithson's-like arguments, of which I don't necessarily always agree on how the Smithsons used it. But I mean, the phrase is interesting. Yes, of course, if you take the topic seriously, I mean, space, as open and for that reason difficult as it is, in a more focused way, I think it's very much also our own interest. I mean, and so for that reason, I mean, cutting space into the trash was one of these sentences or statements which was used in an article on us and in the 2G. And well, I think it says it all. So yes, it's one of our core interests. I mean, not in a very philosophical way, although perhaps it might have these sides, but in a very simple, pragmatical way that architecture for us, more than about function, to bring it now in this very black and whitish statement, is about space, and about sequences of spaces, and about giving people space to finally do whatever they want.